Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Professor Nikki Jones, and it is my honor to welcome you all today to this Unruly Witness, June Jordan's Legacy, and to introduce our outstanding slate of panelists. Before I begin with our long list of thank yous, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the passing of a dear friend and mentor to so many in our department, our eternal seasoned elder in residence, Miss Daphne Muse. Miss Muse joined the ancestors on Sunday, February 22nd. We miss her deeply. She would have loved this week's slate of events, would have loved this conversation, and would have had many a story to tell, I am sure. And she's probably chopping it up somewhere in the heavens with June, Barb Christian, Veve Clark, and so many others. So thank you, Miss Muse. We love you, and we will continue to do the work you've inspired us to do. Thank you for allowing us that moment. Yes, breathe. Let's breathe. I'm sure there are folks here who knew Miss Muse, who were inspired by her, who were taught by her, and we are her legacy. So this event is organized by the Departments of African American and Gender and Women's Studies at UC Berkeley, the Fountain Theater of Los Angeles, and Adrienne Torf. We want to thank our co-organizers for generously collaborating on this programming. We want to thank our generous partners and co-sponsors here at the Berkeley Art Museum and Pacific Film Archive for hosting us this afternoon and recording the event, in particular, Sherry Goodman and Sean Carson. Thank you to Jim Sugarman at the Bamfa store for making copies of the book available for sale. Don't forget to get a copy. Here it is. It's also right there. You can get yours signed. We'd also like to thank our sponsors who helped to fund our week of programming, including J.T. Mason, the American Culture Center, Solmaz Sharif, Dean Rockeray in the Social Sciences Dean's Office, the Department of Geography, the Center for Race and Gender, the Center for the Study of Sexual Cultures, the Department of Comparative Literature, the Department of Ethnic Studies, the College Writing Programs, UCB Night Out, Night Off for graduate students, and the Division of Equity, Inclusion. We have a team, folks. We got some folks behind us in this battle that we are in. Yes. And a big thank you to our co-sponsors who have spread the word about our programming, including the Department of Theater and Performance Studies, the Gender Equity Resource Center, and the Center for Research on Social Change. Of course, none of this would be possible, and if I've said it once, I'd say it a million times, without the support of our amazing staff. Thank you, Barbara Montano of African American Studies. Jillian Edgelow of Gender and Women's Studies, and Joy Wilson in African American Studies. This has already been an incredible week. Please join us for our last program in the series tomorrow, February 26th, June Jordan's Poetry for the People, Legacies and Futures, which will be held at the Arts Research Center on campus at 3:30 p.m. We will hear from mentees of June and teachers of her poetry for the people. And now I will introduce our speakers who will present in the order of introduction, beginning with Leigh Raiford. Leigh Raiford is Professor of African American and African Diaspora Studies at UC Berkeley. Professor Raiford teaches, researches, curates, and writes about Black visuality and world making, and co-directs with Tiana Paschel the Black Studies Collaboratory, an ongoing initiative to amplify the intellectual and activist work of Black studies. Professor Raiford is the author of Imprisoned in a Luminous Glare, Photography in the African American Freedom Struggle, which is also available in the bookstore last time I checked, and the forthcoming When Home is a Photograph, Blackness and Belonging in the World, which will be out on April 14th, 2026. That's right. Writing books in time. The book is already described as a masterpiece and a tour de force. Pre-order your copy now. Adrienne Torf, composer and pianist and poet, teacher, and activist. June Jordan were artistic collaborators and life partners for 19 years until Jordan's passing in 2002. Together, they wrote their full-length documentary opera, Bang Bang Über Alles. And if y'all were there last night, that's in your head. And numerous works for performance by themselves and by ensembles recorded on Collaboration, Selected Works 1983 to 2000, A Bongo Music 2000. A Bongo? A Bongo. A Bongo. Adrienne's original compositions for piano and synthesizer are captured on 3 solo albums, Here I Am, 2025, Two Hands Open, 2003, and Brooklyn from the Roof, 1986, all on her label, A Bongo Music. Kelly Elaine Navies, the descendant of several generations of Appalachians, African-American Appalachians. Kelly Elaine Navies came of age in the California Bay Area, but has lived in Washington, D.C. for the past 20 years, doing oral history in libraries and museums, writing and mothering a young artist. It's beautiful work. She has an undergraduate degree in African-American Studies Humanities with a humanities emphasis from UC Berkeley and an MLIS from the Catholic University of America. Zack Rogow is the author, editor, or translator of more than 20 books or plays. His 10th book of poems, The Kama Sutra for Senior Citizens and Other Poems on Aging, is being published by Valley Press in the UK. Zack's memoir, Hugging My Father's Ghost, was released by Spooten Duvel Publishing. And you can find out more at Zack Rogow, at ZACKROGOW.com. Elizabeth Riva Meyer, LMFT, has worked in schools and community-based care as a trauma therapist for the past 18 years. Joining June Jordan's Poetry for the People as an original member in 1991 remains one of the most influential periods of her life, with truth-telling as a core tenet and political act. She weaves these teachings into her clinical practice at Embrace Mental Health, as a group facilitator, and as a mentor. A growing passion includes organizational consultation, where leadership and staff have opportunities to explore the impact of historical and group dynamics in the workplace. And you can learn more about that work at Listening for Legacy, listeningforlegacy.com. And Ruth Forman is a founding member of June Jordan's Poetry for the People program, a professor, acclaimed poet, and author of poetry and children's literature. Her latest children's books are Do I Love You? Yes, I Do, Like So, and Light at Simon & Schuster. And you can find out more at Ruth Forman, RUTHFORMAN.com. Let's give our panelists a round of applause. Looking forward to this. And let us begin.
Good afternoon. This may be a little difficult for me because I miss Miss Muse. But I was also struck by a quote of June Jordan that we heard in the play last night, in the show last night, about living so large that you feel, you know when they're gone. And so I want to celebrate and encourage, remind all of us to live large, to live unapologetically. I'm very thrilled to have made it into this book. I'm still sort of unsure how I got here. I arrived here in 2004 as a professor, as a young assistant professor, so after June's passing. But it was very clear to me, and arrived into a department that was really in grief. But it was clear to me that so much of what I was doing and the space that I was in was informed by June's work, her legacy by Barbara Christian and so many others. In 2000, around the pandemic in 2021, our department felt like we needed to take stock of who we are, who we're here for, what we're about, what we care about. And we dedicated our critical conversations lecture series in the 21-22 year to June Jordan. And we called the series Catching Up with June, which actually came from the conversation, the opening conversation with Angela Davis and Pratibha Parmar. So Catching Up with June, celebrating the life and legacy of June Jordan. The first half of the year, we opened with a conversation that I moderated between Pratibha Parmar, the filmmaker, and Angela Davis, and we got the PFA to stream, I should say, A Place of Rage for free for about 2 weeks. And then we had a conversation. The second event was on June Jordan's Architectural Imaginary. The third event was on Black girlhood, and then the spring series was devoted to her poetry. So I won't read the biography introduction, but I want to I'll share a couple of parts of the conversation. So our conversation is a celebration of June Jordan and an opportunity to learn together the depth of her radical commitments, the incisiveness of her pen, and the expansiveness of her vision for liberation. Gathering is at once grounding and generative, a reminder of the Black feminist foundations of our work at UC Berkeley, and an opportunity to renew our commitment to Black studies as life studies. And I want to pause here because we are gathered underneath our colleague Stephanie Sujuko's incredible installation, Present Tense Roll Call, which Stephanie, as you can see up there, asks, how do we as educators, students, and learners reclaim public space for knowledge increasingly under threat? Stephanie asked a number of people to submit essays, readings that are grounding for them. And I submitted June Jordan's Black Studies, Bringing Back the Person, which you can see up there, Civil Wars, under that second yellow tab. So we began with A Place of Rage, which offers a fierce, trenchant assessment of the social movements of the 1960s from the vantage point of the 1990s culture wars. The film features interviews with three of the most influential Black feminist intellectuals of our time, Angela Davis, Alice Walker, and June Jordan, along with third world feminist filmmaker and our colleague at UC Berkeley, Trinh Minh Ha. Davis, Walker, and Jordan highlight the centrality of Black women's labor and the necessity of intersectional movements for the liberation of all people, past, present, and future. The film stands as one of the few opportunities we have to hear Jordan in her own words and to hear her laughter. A Place of Rage is also a portrait of solidarity, that agreement of feeling or action, of mutual support within a group from which friendship might bloom. I'm thrilled to be in conversation with two of June Jordan's comrades, friends, familiars. Globally recognized filmmaker and human rights activist Pratibha Parmar and activist scholar Angela Davis, who was featured in the film. What's not here is I introduced both of them by reading poems that June had written about them. I'm going to close with one section of Angela Davis. I'd asked, how do you understand June's conception of solidarity in her writing and in her personal relationships? That conception seems to be the crux of her politics and her poetics. And Angela said, it's taken me a while to recognize the extent to which her poetic engagement with the world was her political contribution. I had many conversations with June trying to convince her to participate in this or that event or join this or that organization. I was never really successful. We both really found sisters in each other with respect to our political views, but we expressed that commitment very differently. It has taken me a while to recognize that regardless of the importance of organizing and organizations and a kind of didactic expression, what we are struggling against and for in this moment, in the long run, is important, but it's not really going to change the world in ways we thought it would. The arts engage with life and the world by acknowledging the role of the senses and visuality. In the final analysis, that is what has the capacity to help us engage in radical transformation. My sense of what it means to be active in and committed to a collective process has changed over time. There was a time when I was convinced that collective work had to happen literally in a collective context, so that it could not happen unless we were in active communication with groups of political people. June helped me understand that creating the collective can also happen in the process of producing art. June's art, her poetry, was saturated with the sense of the power of masses of people. Although she was not the one who wanted to go out and try to put those groups of people together. And the ways in which she navigated the relationships between politics, aesthetics, political commitment, and artistic commitment are so revealing. And I will leave it there.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I am Adrienne Torf. I, of course, have something prepared, but I am moved at the same time to try and stitch together very briefly a preface to what I am going to read from my contribution to this book. First of all, acknowledging the 4 editors, Lauren Mueller, the late Lauren Mueller, who was such a... Becky Thompson, Dominique Hill, and Darrell Collier. And our thanks to them. As with every collection, this was a labor of love, and it took years, and they did it. Thank you to them. I'm also thinking a lot about legacies and thinking a lot about what it means for us to be gathering this week in honor of June's legacy, and referring back, Professor Raiford, to your quote of June's around living large, living in a way that people notice when we are no longer here. And what I hope to convey is that we don't have to be famous to do that. Everyone in this room is actually doing that right now. I did not know Ms. Muse. I knew of her through so many people, and so I feel the grief of her loss. And finally, this piece I'm going to read is very personal, and I hope that you will be able to hear it as something that is much more allegorical. It is, on the surface, a piece about the relationship that June and I had, how we met, and how we spent the rest of the 19 years that we had together. But it's a piece about romance. And so, as is my wont, I immediately went to the dictionary to say, there's got to be another way to think about romance. And, you know, sometimes that falls flat on its face, like Webster is not our friend. But the first definition I came across was this: a feeling of excitement and a mystery associated with love. And for those of you who can quickly click into what love meant in June Jordan's universe, then I hope you can see yourselves in this story and see yourselves in your everyday life as approaching whomever you meet with that same sense of excitement about the possibilities of those intersections. It began as a romance. It began, of course, as a romance. So much of June's life was a romance. As a child, the romance with language. The romance of and with a young white man in a yellow Oxford cloth shirt, leafleting jacketless on a cold autumn day. The passionate romances with women and with men. The romance of Buck, her beloved Airedale, trotting along a beach in winter, all things are dear that disappear. The romance from a distance and the romance up close, the romance of Chet Baker, of Michel Ndegeocello, of Jenny Portnoff's cow painting, holding tight to the dining room wall. The romance with students, and so many of June's students are in the room right now, I gotta tell you. The romance of June's students occupying the sidewalk next to CNN or on Sproul Plaza, or Junichi Sumitsu boldly delivering his poem at a UC Regents meeting. The romance of a clean white shirt, of a tennis court, of a Volkswagen GTI speeding toward home on a dark winter evening, of someone new, of someone gone. The romance of all life is possible. The romance of all love is possible as well. It began, of course, as a romance one snowy April night in a theater in Minneapolis. June let off the program reading poems. I played piano for a singer. After the show, she asked to meet me. In the green room, she explained through dark glasses and the smoke of a slim brown Sherman MCD. She explained in her impeccably tailored mocha-colored suit, pearl gray blouse, matching hose and heels way too tall for walking in snow. She explained that others had set her poems to music, but this time she said she wanted the poem and the music to grow together, to be conceived and created in tandem, a real collaboration, she said, through the smoke and the shades and the echoes of poetry and music from the hall. I said, yes, of course, wouldn't you? 19 years and a continent's breath between us, we began. At first, June sent me drafts of poems through the mail. She would read them to me over the phone, and I would mail back to her a cassette recording of the music I'd written for those drafts. From the beginning, the music was there, embedded and alive in June's poetry. In the language, the rhythms, the imagery, the so often lyrical lines, I found it impossible not to hear the music. Joseph Papp and Leonard Bernstein asked to hear what we were writing, curious about this collaboration. Upon hearing our works in progress, they each separately made the same suggestion: build a story around it. It belongs on the stage. So in 1984, I moved to Brooklyn, where we could collaborate in full, intertwining our lives first there, then in Berkeley for the next 18 years. Two shells hinged together pretty tough at the joint, she described us. By the fall, we had written the working version of what became Bang Bang Über Alles, our full-length stage musical about a confrontation between young performing artists and the Ku Klux Klan. On the opening night of Bang Bang's run at 7 stages in Atlanta in 1986, men of the Ku Klux Klan in hoods and robes and men of the Aryan Nation in camouflage came to burn down the theater, to shut us down, to terrorize us, to shut us up. The cast and the band met them in the parking lot and sang our song, Death to the Klan, to their faces. That too was a romance. Poetry and music facing off with those who opposed our love and our insistence on love, with poetry and music winning. As we prepared to record collaboration, June Jordan and Adrienne Torf selected works 1983 to 2000. June wrote to a friend, and I quote, about the complexity and conflict in which Adrienne and I have elected to collaborate as artists and comrades and family, despite our own actual and apparent differences. Our collaboration itself testifies to possibilities of original and creative response to big events that tend, more often than not, to smother singular and creative affirmations. This recording redefines collaboration and makes it mean something as powerful as it is engaged, as aggressive as it is beautiful and tender. How to keep alive coherent opportunities for affirmation and resistance in this century, I ask myself, as replete as the last with conflagrations and injuries and deaths and victories of spirit and substance both. I turn often to Who Look at Me, June's first published book. The title I read as a subjunctive rather than a question, a possibility, a desire, an expression of uncertainty. Who look at me? Is that not the definition of romance? To look at another, to see in them, to have them see in us possibilities for love? And always, always, I turn to this from June's essay, A Powerful Hatred. We need each of us to begin the awesome, difficult work of love, loving ourselves so that we become able to love others without fear, so that we can become powerful enough to enlarge the circle of our trust and our common striving for a safe, sunny afternoon near to flowering trees and under a very blue sky. It begins as a romance. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is good to be home. I grew up right here. I went to Berkeley High School. There are a couple of faces in the audience there. I just heard the news about Daphne Muse, and she participated in one of my recent oral history projects at the Smithsonian, our Social Justice Conversations Oral History Project. We have a wonderful interview with her. I'm so sorry to hear this news. Goodness. So I'm going to give an introduction, a little brief introduction before I read the second part of this essay so that you know what I'm reading. And thank you for shouting out Lauren Muller. In this essay, I talk about how I became an oral historian. But I also talk about the first time I was introduced to June Jordan. So like a lot of young people, when I graduated from high school, I left town. I went to UCLA first, and before I transferred back to Berkeley. And I had the luck of having a course with Ntozake Shange. So I write about that. My last course at UCLA she was a visiting professor there. And in that class, she gave us the book of essays by June Jordan. It was the first time that I had read June. So I write about that, and particularly about the essay she wrote about Phyllis Wheatley and the profound impact that had on me. So I'll start from that piece. I finished Shange's class on a whole new level of consciousness from when I began, eager to continue my study of African American history and poetry in UC Berkeley's African American Studies Department. Serendipitously, my arrival on Berkeley's campus in the fall of 1989 coincided with that of June Jordan. I immediately signed up for her class, The Politics of Female Childhood. Here, I met the woman in the flesh, and she was funny, direct, soft, and fierce all at the same time. She had this way of challenging you with her all-knowing eyes, dead serious one minute, and the next, erupting into the silliest girlish laughter. Her curriculum embodied her entire philosophy of writing and really of the meaning of life itself. We read the autobiographical essay, Such Were the Joys by George Orwell, and the novel Brown Girl, Brownstones by Pauli Marshall, works that are seemingly unrelated but essentially different takes on self-exploration, class analysis, and marginalization. Then she would challenge us to write about our own female childhoods with provocative prompts like good versus bad, and love or fear. She also had us read passages from the Bible, like 1 Corinthians 13:11. When I was a child, I spoke as a child. I wrote about how I learned that girls and boys were different when I got in trouble for taking off my shirt during recess in elementary school. The boys could take off their shirts when they were hot and sweaty. Why couldn't I? Julia, who's in the audience, will appreciate this, because growing up in Berkeley together. I wrote about discovering the nuances of colloquial Black language when I learned that bad was a compliment. When I first got my afro and my mother's best friend said, "That's bad," I started to cry before they quickly explained what she meant. Often these prompts led to much more serious and heart-wrenching revelations, but June didn't stop with our in-class readings, which took place with our seats arranged in a circle. After we had bared our souls with one another over a period of transformative weeks, she surprised us about midway through the semester by telling us our final project would be to share these stories with the public on the radio. And that we did. We produced an hour-long show for the local public station, KPFA. What would Phyllis Wheatley have said if she had the opportunity to take such a class? What flood of poetic catharsis would emerge from a prompt such as home or mama? After this course, I took another course from her on African American poetry. In this class, we read in the rich tradition of African American poets, from Langston Hughes to Cornelius Eady, and wrote poetry inspired by their works. As we studied the poetry of Gwendolyn Brooks and its themes of motherhood, I wrote a poem called Some Beginnings of My Woman Me that began, all I know come from stories I heard and a faded photo of 3 of my ancestors, me. She, black, fresh earth after morning rain, and comely. Mama says she float on air while chanting juju and picking wild dandelions. During this same semester, I took a course from Barbara Christian called Images of Black Women in Literature. While we studied the works of Ann Petrie, Alice Walker, Toni Morrison, and others, she gave us an optional assignment to write a paper about a maternal ancestor who had lived in the 19th century. Optional, of course, because many people cannot write about their 19th century maternal ancestors because they don't know anything about them, particularly African Americans. I decided to rise to the challenge and go in search of my mother's gardens and write about the ancestor my mother had been telling me about all those years, the mother of the woman who she claimed had floated on air. I decided that I would write my paper based on oral histories with my grandmother's siblings, all of whom remembered this particular ancestor, their grandmother. Thus, from this cauldron of literature, poetry, and history, steeped in themes of motherhood, womanism, and defiance, and immersed in the scholarly and creative worlds of June Jordan, Barbara Christian, Alice Walker, and other Black women writers, I became an oral historian and poet. When I am engaged in the act of what I call soul listening, capturing the story of an elder, the words and worlds of these mentors are my compass, showing me the way and urging me to pass it all on to the next generation of daughters. And I'm going to read the poem that I wrote after that oral history project. It's called Wild Grapevines. Now I know more of the beginnings of my woman me. Over 100 years she walked, grandmother of my mother's mother, many miles over land stolen from the Cherokee, looking for herbs to heal her children. Baby, would you like some sassafras tea, she might say, with a Smoky Mountain twang? Or don't you want a piece of grandma's hot bread, child, before walking another high country mile? From wombs of many sisters she pulled forth new life, and this gift she passed on to Annie, mother of my mother's mother, the one Mama saw rising from the ground while calling on spirits with the holy sound of her voice. Strong Annie married a weak and angry man who tried to beat the wings off her back. But the singing wind tells me that Annie will always fly, 'cause her 7 daughters left the mountains swinging on the ends of wild grapevines. One of the 7 gave birth to my mama, who then gave birth to me, who gives you this poem so you will see that the beginnings of my woman, me, speak to the beginnings of us all, our women, we. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Zack Rogow, and I want to thank Adrienne Torf for inviting me, and the Berkeley Art Museum and Pacific Film Archive for hosting, and all the amazing list of departments that came together to make this week happen. Thank you so much. I think I'll start by reading a poem of June's. This is called Sunflower Sonnet Number 2. Supposing we could just go on as two, voracious in the days apart, as well as when we side by side, the many things we do that, well, I would consider then perfection possible, or else worthwhile to think about. Which is to say, I guess the costs of long-term tend to pile up, block, and complicate, erase away the accidental, temporary, near thing, pulse beat, promises one makes because the chance, the easy new is there in front of you. But still, perfection takes some sacrifice of falling stars for rare. And there are stars, but none of you to spare. And that's a beautiful Shakespearean sonnet that June wrote, but all June. And June had a way of whatever medium she worked in, of making it so personal and so much her own voice. And I thought I'd start by sharing, before I read my part from the anthology, a couple of personal anecdotes. So I first met June in 1974 when I was a hippie peacenik at Yale University, not fitting it in at all with this preppy culture, with my macrame belt that my sister made and my bell bottoms and purple tight t-shirt and long hair, and my professors just didn't know what to make of me. So June was my advisor for my senior thesis, and I read her poem, and she looked at me with that intense stare of total engagement with a student that I've never really experienced from any other teacher in the same way. And after I'd finished the poem, she looked at me and said, "You've got something special, and don't let anyone ever take that away from you." And that has stayed with me my whole, life as a poet, 50 years. And fast forward 25 years, and I was going through a divorce. I had 2 kids. And my kids were going to be with me on Thanksgiving, and I was talking to June shortly before the holiday. And she said, "So what are your plans for Thanksgiving?" And I said, "Well, I have my daughters. I have custody of my daughters." And she said, "Well, where are you going?" And I said, "Well, we don't really have plans." And she said, "Yes, you do. You're coming to my house." And June just had that kind of heart as a person. So I'm going to read my essay now, June Jordan and the Renaissance of Poetry as a Performing Art. And I think those of you who might have heard the June Jordan Experience performance last night, which was so dynamic, had a sense of what it was like to experience June Jordan reading her poetry. It was literally a physical experience. It was unlike any I've encountered in a lifetime as a writer and a fan of poetry. When I heard June read, I literally got goosebumps. I tried really hard to hold back the tears, only ending up wiping them away. I laughed along with June in the moment when she used her amazing humor. You just could not remain indifferent when June Jordan read her poetry. Sometimes you agreed with her, sometimes you didn't, but you had to confront what she was talking about. June once said, "The live reading for me is the critical criterion for my poetry. I assume an audience in everything I write. It's not a personal event, it's an effort at conversation, at least." That was so June to add that, at least. For June, delivering her poems to a public audience was an enactment of the democratic impulse at the heart of poetry. When June published her first book of poems in 1969, there was an unwritten rule among many academic poets in the United States that if you performed your poetry, that was in bad taste. Poetry was supposed to be given with a deadpan delivery, almost like a private conversation. On the one hand, you had confessional poetry, where work was a kind of understated certification of the authenticity of the experience that you were talking about. And there's much to admire in confessional poetry, and much that it gave June as well, if you think about all of her writing. On the other hand, at this time in the late 60s, early 70s, there was experimental or avant-garde poetry where the writer used an abstract reading style that emphasized a tone of almost detached scientific inquiry. And people used to joke when John Ashbery, who won the Pulitzer and the National Book Award with Self-Portrait in a Convex Mirror, even his biggest fans used to joke, John reading was like listening to him reading the Manhattan phone book. And that was the style. There was a certain swagger about not performing your work. And June developed an aesthetic that was 180 degrees different from that, and so original. And by doing this, June was so much closer to literary tradition, where poetry was performed with instruments, from the bards of Homer's epics, which were performed strummed with a lyre, to the griots of West Africa, to the medieval Provençal troubadours who performed with string instruments and wind instruments, to the Chinese poets of the Tang and Song dynasties, where they wrote to the meters of popular song. And June knew all these legacies. She created a dynamic style for her public readings, influenced partly by the poems of the Harlem Renaissance writers and their predecessors like Paul Laurence Dunbar, and partly by the jazz musicians of the 1960s and 70s. So June was an accomplished musician, as you heard last night. She studied classical piano at Juilliard in New York. She had an ear acutely sensitive to the lilts and the pacings of words. She had the idea that a poet could keep reading and reciting until he or she ran out of breath, stringing words in long, rapid bursts of meaning. And that insight spawned entire schools of writing and reading. Starting with her first full-length collection, Some Changes, in 1971, June started to create a completely original way of reading and writing poetry. Part of what makes her poetry reading style so revolutionary is that she fast-timed poetry in a way that no one ever had before, in the same way that bebop jazz speeded up music to respond not just to the rhythms of modern life and urban life, but also to answer the need to express pressing emotions and ideas. Some of her favorites were Gato Barbieri and Chet Baker. And if you listen to the music of that period of the birth of the cool and John Coltrane, you hear that pacing where your breath becomes the length of a measurement of music and a measurement of poetry. June was in many ways the leader and senior member of an extraordinary and multi-talented circle of younger poets in the 1970s and 80s. That circle included Ntozake Shange, who we've heard about tonight, and Sekou Sundiata. If you don't know the work of Sekou Sundiata, check out his amazing CDs. June introduced him when he came here to Berkeley to read. I remember her saying, he had just come out with this CD, The Blue Oneness of Dreams. And June introduced Sekou and she said, if you don't buy this CD, you wrong. Only June can get away with that. Ntozake Shange incorporated many of June's techniques in her now classic play for colored girls who've considered suicide when the rainbow is enough. And that originally came from the Bay Area. Ntozake used to perform in cafes here in the Bay Area, and it was published here in the Bay Area by Alta Jerry at Shameless Hussy Press, and the book was dedicated to June, as well as other collaborators, because that's how influential June was on her peers at that time. June's writing and reading style had an enormous impact on spoken word, slam, and rap poetry. Those schools flowed directly from the style of performance she created. Some of June's impact on poetry, on performance poetry, came through her own work, and some of it through the writers she influenced, like Ntozake Shange and Sekou Sundiata. The breakneck speed that spoken word poets often use on stage definitely derives from June's poetry. The ability of contemporary performance poets to speak openly and impactfully about their own life experiences and politics also owes a great deal to the trails that June blazed. June has influenced almost every performance poet, whether or not they know her work or even her name, just as Petrarch has influenced almost everyone who's written a love sonnet, whether those writers are aware of their lineage through his poems or not. June's readings remain for me the most exciting poetry events I've ever attended. When I was an undergraduate studying with June as my mentor, it was hearing her read that energized me to pursue writing and performing my poetry throughout my life. In a generation that gave the world so many amazing poets, June Jordan stands out as the writer who expanded the possibilities of poetry wider than any other author of her time. Thank you.
Hello. Hey, I'm super happy to be here. I get very emotional when I think of June. So all of a sudden, yeah, you start feeling it. I'm so happy that people are here. It's interesting because I promise I'm going to read. I'm not just going to talk. I promise. I'm known to be chatty. But one thing that I haven't really said out loud, and I was driving here today after I'd seen a kid, and on my way, I was thinking of June, and I was thinking of how amazing it is that obviously, yes, she taught us so much about poetry and the power of the word, but one word that kept popping up was reparenting. And I feel like I got a very deep, deep experience of being reparented. Yeah, by June, by Poetry for the People, by the community created in Poetry for the People, there was something she asked of us that had never been asked of me, and I think of many others. She asked us for truth. She asked us for our own truth. She asked us to stay present with each other's truths. She said there could be multiple truths, which was wild to consider of what I'd grown up in, and that those truths could actually be honored and that we could withstand them together and actually build something greater from that. And that will impact me and has impacted me for the rest of my life. But that reparenting goes deep. It goes really deep. And I'm forever, forever, forever grateful for June and for what was created during that time and continues. It was hard to figure out what to read, but that's because, me and my decision-making process, be difficult sometimes. So I'm going to read a few pieces that I've put together. So it's not going to read in chronological order of the essay, but June would be okay with that. And I'm not, these are, I don't know if these are going to really help me. I'm going to try my best, y'all. I'm going to try my best. All right, here we go. As a poet for the people, June dove right into the underbelly. She did not stay away from or fall asleep to or delude herself from the sicknesses that collectively haunt us. She wove cultural trauma into her writings as wake-up calls and links to present-day atrocities. June used personal experience, relationship, and a practice of stretching across lines to bring issues of national and international horror to the forefront and to the table. She meant business. For June, words were precisely chosen ammunition, accessible to us all and purposely crafted for liberation. When June wrote, she fought, and she fought for the people. She constantly gave voice to anyone denied their God-given humanity and rights, and she always made it clear that the fight was in service of humanizing a condition or relationship. And wrapped into that service was her forever ask about power, who had it, who didn't, and who in the hell set things up like this. I say all this to be explicit about the comradeship I feel in direct relation to June's primary teaching, a cry for truth above all else as life force, self-determination, political freedom, and accountability to one another. And so the act of therapy must be a political undertaking. It must be political because it is about human life. And it must be deeply relational because the sanctity of our lives and our very freedoms are bound up in how we choose to witness, affirm, and speak truth to one another. Therapy is an action we take and make intimately with another. You and the other have the sublime opportunity to be in a relationship that is attempting to wake up. Truth-telling is an act of emancipation, and when done in relationship with others, these acts are revolutionary. Together, we are breaking familial, cultural, and societal codes of relating that attempt to control who we can be inside ourselves and in the company of others. When I sit with the young children who visit my playroom, I track the convergence of two people and the storytelling alive in the moment of dream, of national proportion, of a working through that is bigger than the two of us. When I, a 52-year-old white, Southern, queer Jewish woman, spend time together with an 11-year-old Black heterosexual boy who is West Coast born, history revisits. Cultural dynamics, power dynamics come alive, speak through us in play as well as conversation. And the therapeutic relationship and field become a playground for either awakening or a recurring and oh-so-known deadening. We can rewrite the narrative of abuses and denials, or we can recreate the pattern that has kept pain and suffering incubated, oppressive, and destructive. June would ask me to fight for the rewrite, but not until we have sufficiently, beautifully, and with as much consciousness as possible, dived into the risky waters of naming our truths. The children do this naturally. They tell me their truth in ways I could never prescribe. Their ease in using fantasy and imaginative play to communicate what unconsciously lies beneath the surface amazes me. They guide me. Although the individual stories are distinct, the underlying desire remains the same: to experience mirroring that reflects the significance of one's internal world and disconfirms the terror of being left alone to manage the unmanageable. When I surrender and respond to a child's symbolic howl for connection and security, my hope is to psychically transmit a message of belonging and safety. And from this place of being seen and held as beloved in the mind of another, truth-telling in verbal and nonverbal forms of communication takes place. The boy who lies on the floor of my office, his right hand reaching out for my left in the dark, no words, and it's the middle of a school day. His fingers cup mine to secure the moment, internalize the message: I can choose this. This want is mine. My hand can want another hand. I am safe. This is poetry, specific, personal. This is where our lives must be of worth to one another. I'm reminded of how June lived out personal as political and the political as personal. And in this room, this boy's bravery to ask for what he wants is his rally cry. Because in tending to his hurt, he makes himself vulnerable, humanizes his need, and moves in the direction of truth. He asks our relationship to serve as a buoy, and together we celebrate the power of connection. I let him ground and savor the experience of someone holding space for his emotional reality. We begin the rewrite. Truth-telling is confessional. First, you must break that code of silence internally and risk coming to terms with parts of yourself that have been bracketed off from consciousness. Revelation, even in the most subtle form, is always an aspect of truth-telling. The undoing of silence is a corrective emotional experience, one we so desperately need on a collective level. I hear June's hymn in all our tellings: I am not wrong, wrong is not my name. Oh, my name is my own, my own, my own. These stories we tell are meant to be heard. Oracle, revival, serum. Telling them just to ourselves becomes verbatim and a form of imprisonment. There is something about putting pen to paper, form to want, and speech into air that allows the truth to expand and convert not only the teller, but the listener. Transformation occurs and all parties are elevated. June is in these rooms. She is alive and awake in these tellings because she knows more than anyone. These poems, they are things that I do in the dark, reaching for you, whoever you are, and are you ready? Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And thank you, everyone. September 13th, 2019. Dear June, I will never be as courageous as you, but your courage steps with me. You live in my heart, even when I forget to say a prayer for you. Your pen, my pen's teacher. Your voice, my inspiration and challenge. Your laughter, tinkling like bells in my ears. How can one be such a powerful warrior with such beautiful and delicate laughter? Bells cannot match it, though they do come close. Your laughter somewhere between light bells and wind chimes, I can still hear it. You challenged us to lift and defend the human spirit. Even from my first poetry days and collection, We Are the Young Magicians, I try. I wonder if you could survive these days. With all that fight, the cancer came and stole you from us. What would these days do to you? Would you even sleep? You would be writing and speaking, protesting and traveling. June, oh June, warrior spirit, I miss you. I miss you. How would you fight in these days? Your spirit carries forward in my instruction. I use your guidelines for critiquing a poem every time I teach a creative writing class. At Vona with writers, Breadloaf Masters program with teachers, creative writing workshops. I try to build in the community and justice, celebration and solace. I carry those guidelines from the revolutionary blueprint into every class. We reflect on them as guidelines, not as hard rules, but things to seriously consider. Punctuation always a rich axis for conversation. But we challenge ourselves, try them on, test them, work with them until we know them, as we discuss our own and each other's work. Call them out. 2B, poetry, the achievement of maximum impact with a minimal number of words. 2C, poetry, utmost precision in the use of language, hence density and intensity of expression. 3, what is its purpose? 7B, singularity and vividness of diction. 7D, avoidance of abstractions and generalities. Experienced writer or novice, each student has a common place to speak from as they help each other clarify their words, to work from as they consider their own poems. And the work becomes so clear, so powerful. So many times our class is knocked back by what students are able to express. Afterwards, writers often bring your guidelines to their own fiction or memoir. Middle school and high school English teachers often bring your guidelines to their own classes. June, June. You gifted us a way to bring forth the clarity and power in our words. I try to pass this talisman on for others' voices spilling out onto the page when it all is too much. Minimal words for maximum impact, descriptive verbs, specificity, precision, horizontal and vertical rhythm. June, you sing in every classroom through their words. So I guess that's what you would do in this time. Sing through your students' words, and their students' words, and their students' words, as they speak about what matters to them, as they speak about what they see, their lives and their rights, and the rights of human beings on this planet. As they name, as they witness, you hover in their words. You live in our words. You thrive in our words. You dance in our words. You laugh and smile and sob in our words. And our words, in the midst of this crushing world, they are beautiful. Thank you.
Ooh, please join me, everyone, in thanking our panelists once again. We won't have a formal Q&A, but I invite you to come down and to be in conversation with the panelists. I invite you to come down and buy a copy of the book. What June say, if you don't, I'm not, you wrong. But I will say, in all honesty, I also want to say, as a reader of this book, thank you. This book is a gift. I sat with this book throughout the month. It would be the book that I read in the morning when I sat down in the 20 minutes of quiet in my house. And I turned to the book for inspiration, and it provided that. So thank you. It was really a gift to hear everyone. Your voices come alive. I feel one of the things I'm taking away from today's readings is this intertwining of grief and love, and how June is asking us to develop, grow the capacity to hold both to be run down by it when you're grieving and to be lifted up by it when you are loving. That is what I'm taking away. So thank you for that. And thank all of you for being here. Thank you.